Hello, and a very warm welcome to you. It is absolutely fantastic to have you here with us for today's deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. It's going to be a good one.
It really is. So I want you to close your eyes for a second. I mean, unless you're driving, in which case, please keep them firmly on the road.
Yeah, safety first, definitely.
Right, but I want you to think back to a specific moment in your life when you felt like completely in control. A time when you confidently mapped out your entire future.
Oh, I know exactly the kind of moment you're talking about.
Right. Maybe it was the classic bullet-pointed 5-year plan. You knew exactly what job you were going to have, the city you were going to live in, maybe even, the specific type of person you'd be sitting next to on a Sunday morning.
You had the blueprint.
Exactly. You had the blueprint. You were the architect of your own destiny. And then
reality happens.
Right. Reality steps in, takes one look at your beautiful, meticulously color-coded plan, and just simply says no.
Yeah. And it is honestly one of the most profoundly disorienting experiences a human being can go through.
It really is.
It's that sudden vertigo-inducing moment of realizing the script you've spent, years memorizing is for a play that has just been completely canceled.
Well, yeah.
The scenery has been struck, the theater is dark, and you're just standing there on an empty stage holding lines that no longer make any sense.
That exact feeling of vertigo is kind of the core mission of our deep dive today. We are unpacking an incredibly rich set of sources anchored by this deeply relatable conversation between two individuals. We're just going to call them Jack and Emma for the sake of our discussion.
Right.
And they dismantle this immense, almost crushing societal pressure we all feel to just, stick to the plan. We're going to explore the underlying psychology of change, the very real biological trap of sunk costs.
Which is a huge one.
Massive. And how to navigate that terrifying yet potentially liberating space of simply not knowing what comes next.
Yeah. And the overarching theme we're confronting today is that our collective relationship with plans fundamentally misunderstands the nature of human growth.
Mm-hmm.
We have this strange tendency to treat the world as if it's a static, predictable machine. And we treat ourselves as if we're finished, immutable products.
Which we aren't at all.
Not even a little bit. The reality of the world is wildly unpredictable, chaotic, and subject to, endless variables.
Yeah.
Furthermore, human beings are constantly evolving. So our analysis today is going to look at the severe psychological friction that occurs when we smash these rigid, inflexible plans against a highly dynamic reality.
Okay, let's unpack this because the conversation in the source immediately jumps straight into the deep end. There is this sharp realization that one of the hardest moments in life isn't necessarily when things go wrong in a mechanical sense.
Right.
Because when something breaks, say, you lose a job or a relationship ends, you at least know it's broken.
Exactly. You can point to it.
Right. You can identify the point of failure. The truly agonizing moment is when your entire life plan simply stops making sense internally.
Yeah, that transition from a mechanical failure to an existential crisis is a crucial distinction. Think about it in terms of navigation.
Okay.
If your car breaks down on the way to a destination, you're delayed, you're frustrated. You might have to spend money you didn't want to spend.
Sure.
But your underlying purpose remains intact.
Right.
You still know where you're trying to go. You just need to fix the car, call a tow truck,
I
whatever.
still want to get to the beach or wherever.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
The crisis we are examining today is the moment you're sitting in the car, the engine is running perfectly, the road is clear, but you realize you don't even want to go to that destination anymore.
Oh man, you're just staring at the steering wheel thinking, why am I even driving to the city? I don't even like it there.
Right.
And that introduces a completely different flavor of uncertainty.
It introduces an internal void. And, the human brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. From an evolutionary standpoint, our survival has depended on our ability to predict the immediate future.
Like predicting danger and stuff?
Right. If I hear rustling in the bushes, my brain predicts a predator and I run. If I plant seeds in the spring, my brain predicts a harvest in the fall. We're biologically wired to crave certainty because certainty historically meant safety.
That makes total sense.
So when your overarching life plan suddenly dissolves, it isn't just an inconvenience. Your nervous system often interprets it as a literal threat.
A physical threat. Wow.
Yeah, because you don't know what the next version of your life is going to look like. Sometimes you're so terrified of that void, of that unmapped territory, that you don't even want to find out. You'd rather drive to the city you hate than pull over into the dark.
Which brings us to a brilliant breakdown from the sources of what a plan actually is, functionally speaking. We have this habit of treating plans as predictions.
We really do.
Like, We write them down in our journals or put them in our performance reviews like we're fortune tellers gazing into a crystal ball, trying to dictate what the universe is going to do over the next 60 months.
Yeah, it's wild.
But a plan isn't a prediction at all. A plan is actually just a tool to help us make decisions in the present.
And that reframe completely shifts the power dynamic between you and your future. When we view a plan as a prediction, we set ourselves up for an unwinnable battle against reality.
Because reality always wins.
Exactly. Reality does not care about the timeline you created. Macroeconomic shifts happen. Entire industries are disrupted by technology overnight. Unexpected health issues arise.
Or just, a chance encounter at a coffee shop completely alters your romantic trajectory.
Right. If you deeply believe your plan was a prediction, any deviation from it feels like a massive personal failure. You feel like you messed up the timeline.
Like you failed the test.
Yeah, but if a plan is merely an organizational tool to help you figure out what to do today, then changing the plan isn't a failure at all. It's simply updating your toolkit based on new data.
Think about the version of you that picked your current career path or your college major. How old were you? 18.
20.
Yeah, literal kids. You were making a plan based on the desires, limitations, and worldly understanding of an 18-year-old. Years later, you've grown, you've accumulated complex new experiences, your prefrontal cortex has actually fully developed.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah, and your values have likely shifted. Yet so many of us feel obligated to serve as the executor of that teenager's will. We're protecting a plan we no longer even believe in.
What's fascinating here is how we become more loyal to an old, calcified idea of ourselves than to the dynamic person we are actively becoming.
Oh, it's so true.
You're subjugating your present. Adult needs to honor a guess made by a younger version of yourself who knew significantly less about the world.
I want to throw an analogy at you because this really got me thinking about the mechanics of how we get stuck.
Let's hear it.
Okay, imagine it's the 1800s and someone draws a very detailed, beautiful map for you. You have your horse, your compass, and this map. Now fast forward to today. You are sitting in a modern car, driving on a massive interstate highway, but you are stubbornly holding on to that 1800s map.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, you're looking at the piece of parchment, then looking out the windshield at a giant concrete overpass, and you are getting angry that there is an overpass where a dirt trail is supposed to be.
Right, getting mad at reality.
Exactly. If you insist on driving your car based on the 1800s map while ignoring the modern highway right in front of you, you are going to crash. The map is not the territory. The map is just a drawing. The territory is reality, and the territory is changed.
That perfectly illustrates the absurdity of our rigidity. I mean, in that scenario, you're valuing a piece of paper over the actual physical landscape outside your window.
Yeah.
And we do this with our lives constantly. We value the map we drew at 22 more than the actual psychological, emotional, and economic landscape we're currently standing in at 35.
We really do.
We force ourselves into careers, relationships, or cities that make us miserable simply because they were the next landmark drawn on the map.
But let's push into the reality of this. If we logically know this, if we can sit here and agree that plans are just present-day tools and the map isn't the territory, why is it so agonizing to actually fold up that old map and toss it in the glove box?
It's so hard.
Why does it feel physically painful to abandon a plan when it is clearly making us miserable?
Well, to understand that, we really have to examine the psychological weight of investment. It's one thing to realize a path is conceptually wrong in a vacuum. It's entirely another to step off a path you have been walking, sweating on, and pouring your resources into for years.
Right.
We are bumping up against the notorious sunk cost trap and the severe identity crisis that accompanies it.
Let's really dig into the sunk cost trap. We are talking about the listener who has spent 7, maybe 10 years in a specific career. They took on student debt for it. They spent countless sleepless nights studying for it.
Their parents brag about it at dinner parties.
Oh, totally. Their entire social circle is built around it. And then they wake up one morning and realize, I hate this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. The term sunk cost is borrowed from economics, but its psychological application is devastatingly relevant to our daily lives.
Right.
The fallacy is the irrational belief that because you've already invested heavily in something, be it time, money, or emotional energy, you must continue to invest in it, even if the current reality is making you miserable or yielding a net negative return.
Right, because quitting feels like losing everything you put in.
Exactly. Behavioral economists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman did groundbreaking work on loss aversion, proving that human beings feel the pain of losing something roughly twice as powerfully as they feel the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
So losing $100 feels way worse than finding $100 feels good.
Precisely. We are biologically wired to hate losing things. And to avoid the pain of recognizing a loss, we will engage in highly irrational behavior.
Wow.
In the context of a life plan, the individual thinks, I've already spent 5 years at this law firm. If I quit now, I will have wasted those 5 years. But here is the brutal, undeniable truth of the sunk cost. That time is already gone.
It's just gone.
It is spent. You cannot get those 5 years back, no matter what you do. The universe does not offer refunds on time.
Wow. So the real question isn't whether the past 5 years were worth it. The real question is whether continuing is worth the next 5 years.
That is the crux of the cognitive shift. Because we're so desperate to avoid the feeling of having wasted the past, we willingly sign up to waste our future.
That's terrifying.
It is. We sacrifice the next 5 years of our potential happiness to justify a past decision. We turn the past into a prison.
Sacrificing your future to justify your past, that is a heavy, heavy reality to confront. And it isn't just about time or money, right? It is deeply intertwined with identity, which makes the extraction process so much messier.
Oh, absolutely.
If you spend a decade introducing yourself at every party, every networking event, every family gathering by saying, I'm an architect or I'm a surgeon, that isn't just your job anymore. That is a load-bearing pillar of your ego.
Yeah, and when you strip away that professional title, the void isn't just financial, it's fundamentally existential. Who are you if you aren't the architect?
Right.
The job has provided a convenient, universally understood shorthand for your worth, your social status, your intellect, and your place in the community. Leaving the job feels like severing a limb because your brain has integrated that title into your core sense of self.
So you aren't just losing a paycheck, you feel like you are losing your identity.
Exactly. And this fear of losing our identity leads to a terrifyingly common phenomenon. People will actively choose to stay in situations that make them profoundly unhappy because at least the unhappiness is familiar.
Yes, the familiar unhappiness.
There is a strange comfort in familiar unhappiness that often feels significantly safer to the nervous system than unfamiliar possibility.
Because you know what to expect.
Right. If you wake up every Tuesday knowing exactly how your boss is going to demean you, exactly how the commute will drain you, and exactly how bored you will feel by 3:00 p.m., your brain can prepare for it.
It can brace for impact.
Yeah, it can release a steady, manageable drip of stress hormones. You've built psychological calluses for that specific friction. But the unknown, quitting and trying something new, the unknown is where the evolutionary predators hide.
The rustling in the bushes again.
Exactly. Your amygdala perceives the ambiguity of a new path as a literal threat to your survival, preferring the certainty of misery over the uncertainty of joy.
Well, wait, let me play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener. I feel like we need to challenge this a bit.
Sure.
Isn't there something to be said for loyalty? For grit? We culturally celebrate people who push through hardship, who don't give up when things get tough. How do you know if you are just quitting because things are getting a little difficult versus bravely walking away from a sunk cost? Where's the line between lack of resilience and a healthy pivot?
That is a phenomenal question and a very necessary distinction to make. The difference between grit and the sunk cost fallacy lies entirely in the nature of the suffering and the alignment with your ultimate goal.
Okay, break that down for me.
Grit is the endurance of short-term difficulty because you genuinely, deeply believe in the long-term destination. You're slogging through the mud, you're exhausted, and you're cold, but you keep walking because you desperately want to reach the castle on the hill. The pain has a purpose.
Okay, so the pain is an investment in a desired outcome.
Exactly. The sunk cost trap, however, is slogging through that same mud, realizing the castle on the hill is actually a mirage, or realizing you don't even like castles, but continuing to walk in the mud anyway, simply because you've already ruined your shoes.
Oh, wow. Continuing to walk just because your shoes are already ruined. That's perfectly put.
Yeah, the pain has no purpose other than to validate the previous pain. The key to untangling this is how we view the past. The past shouldn't be a prison warden that forces you to keep walking toward a destination you despise. The past should be a research laboratory.
So those 5 years you spent becoming a lawyer, even if you quit tomorrow to become a landscape architect, they aren't wasted.
They are only wasted if you refuse to extract the data. Those 5 years provided invaluable high-definition data about your internal operating system.
Like what you actually like doing.
Right. They taught you what kind of environments drain your energy, how you respond to hyper-competitive colleagues, what tasks put you in a flow state, and what ethical boundaries are non-negotiable for you.
Yeah.
The past informs your next move. It doesn't have to dictate it. The data is yours to keep, even if you leave the profession.
If we realize we are acting out of an irrational fear of sunk costs, and we recognize we are clinging to familiar unhappiness, how do we stop the bleeding? Like, let's say someone listening has that moment of clarity today. They decide to blow up the 1800s map and start fresh. Well, we hit a massive warning sign right here in the source material concerning the extreme danger of the fresh start, the tension between escaping a problem versus actually evolving past it.
This is a critical pivot in the psychology of change. Because once a person finally overcomes the inertia of a sunk cost and realizes they need a change, the pendulum often swings violently to the extreme opposite.
You just want to burn it all down.
Right, they want a completely clean slate.
Yeah.
But the urge to start over is frequently weaponized by our own subconscious as an excuse to avoid taking personal responsibility for our internal patterns.
We see this all the time. Someone goes through a messy breakup or a massive failure at work, and they instantly hit the eject button. They shout, "I'm starting over," and move across the country.
Yeah.
But they haven't actually learned a single thing about why the failure happened. They are just changing the scenery.
In psychological circles, this is sometimes referred to as the geographic cure. It is the deeply flawed belief that moving to a new city, finding a new partner, or getting a new job will magically eradicate the internal distress you are experiencing.
Which it never does.
Never. We have to make a razor-sharp distinction between changing your external environment and changing your internal psychological patterns.
Think about the classic bad boss scenario. You absolutely despise your manager. They micromanage you, they don't listen, and it is making you miserable. So you quit.
Right.
You celebrate. You update your LinkedIn, you get a new job. But because you never examined your own conflict-avoidant communication style, you proceed to treat your new manager with the exact same defensiveness. You don't set boundaries, you don't ask clarifying questions, and 6 months later, you find yourself hating this new job just as much.
Or consider the interpersonal example. You feel profoundly lonely and disconnected in your current city. You blame the city, the people here are unfriendly, the culture is cold.
I just need to live somewhere cooler.
Exactly. You spend thousands of dollars to move across the country to a city renowned for its vibrant social scene. But when you get there, you unpack your boxes, sit in your new apartment, never initiate plans, never join any local groups, and reject invitations because of social anxiety.
And the shocker, of course, is that you're still lonely.
Because changing your circumstances does not automatically change you. Wherever you go, there you are.
Right. You pack your internal patterns, your unresolved trauma, your insecure attachment styles, and your communication deficits right alongside your socks and toothbrushes.
Exactly. If the root of the problem is an internal pattern, a new environment will simply become a new stage, with a new set of actors for you to play out the exact same tragic script.
It's like being stuck in a loop.
It is. This is closely related to repetition compulsion, the unconscious drive to place ourselves in situations where we repeat old traumas in a futile attempt to finally resolve them.
So, what does this all mean for the listener who desperately wants a change? How do we stop ourselves from just running on a new treadmill in a different room? We have to ask ourselves two vital, penetrating questions when we feel the urge to burn it all down. What exactly am I trying to escape versus what am I hoping to build?
Those two questions act as the ultimate antidote to the geographic cure.
They're so powerful.
If your mental energy is entirely focused on what you are trying to escape, the suffocating town, the toxic relationship, the boring job, your energy is entirely reactive. You're like an animal fleeing a predator.
Right.
You're running away from a negative stimulus. And if you are only running away, you will eventually end up somewhere else completely by accident.
You're just sprinting blindly through the woods in the dead of night. You might get away from the bear, but eventually you're going to smash face first into a tree.
Exactly. The second question, what am I hoping to build, forces a shift from reactive panic to proactive vision. It requires you to sit down and do the uncomfortable hard work of self-reflection.
The stuff we usually want to avoid.
Right. What values are you trying to center? What kind of daily routine brings you peace? What specific skills do you want to utilize? If you deeply understand what you are moving toward, the change becomes intentional and structurally sound.
Yeah.
Genuine change must include reflection. Without reflection, you are merely changing the wallpaper in your mental prison. You aren't writing a new chapter, you're just rereading the old one in a different font.
Rereading the old chapter in a different font, that is a haunting image. And a massive reason we get so desperate to run away, a huge reason we feel this frantic, suffocating urge to just change our circumstances immediately without reflecting, is because we feel like we are losing a race.
Oh, the race.
A race we didn't even realize we had signed up for. Which brings us to one of the most universal, agonizing pains of modern life. The toxic role of comparison and the crushing feeling of being behind.
The very concept of being behind implies a profound assumption, right? That there's a set linear track with standardized markers that every human being is supposed to hit at exactly the same time.
Which is ridiculous when you say it out loud.
It is. But the anxiety of comparison has always existed. We are social primates who inherently gauge our standing within the tribe to ensure our survival and access to resources. But modern life, and specifically the digital age, has taken this biological quirk and poured rocket fuel on it.
Social media, we have turned our phones into omnipresent scoreboards.
Yes. Historically, your tribe consisted of maybe 150 people in your immediate geographic vicinity. You compared yourself to the blacksmith down the road or the farmer next door.
Right.
Today, your tribe is global. You are comparing yourself to 8 billion people, including prodigies, billionaires, and heavily filtered influencers.
It is psychologically brutal. You open your phone on a random Tuesday evening, and within 3 swipes, you are bombarded. Someone from high school just bought a stunning mid-century modern house. Your former coworker just got a massive promotion to vice president. Your cousin is getting married in a Tuscan villa.
It's relentless.
And there you are, sitting on your slightly stained couch in sweatpants, eating cereal for dinner, thinking, what on earth am I doing with my life? I have failed.
You are falling into the classic trap of comparing your gritty behind-the-scenes footage with everyone else's highly produced highlight reel.
It's so true, but it's so hard to remember in the moment, You see the gleaming new house on Instagram, but you don't see the crippling mortgage anxiety keeping them awake at 3 a.m.
Right, you don't see the fights.
Yeah, you see the promotion to VP, but you don't see the 60-hour work weeks, the stress-induced ulcer, and the arguments with their spouse because they are never home. You only see the highlight reel of their life, but you have intimate, front row, 24/7 access to your own doubts, your own credit card debt, and your own messy behind-the-scenes reality.
Mathematically speaking, it is a rigged game. You are comparing your 100% reality to their highly curated, manicured 5%. You will always lose that comparison. However, what I find truly intellectually rigorous about navigating this in our source material is that we shouldn't just rely on the cliché self-help advice.
Right, the standard advice is always, just stop comparing yourself to others, delete the app, put on blinders. But that isn't realistic. As you said, we are biologically wired to compare. So instead of fighting human nature, we need a more sophisticated approach, using comparison as a clue rather than a verdict.
Treating comparison as a clue, not a verdict, is a massive paradigm shift.
I love this concept.
When you feel that hot flash of jealousy, the verdict mindset acts as a judge. It bangs the gavel and declares, they are successful, I am a failure, I am fundamentally inadequate.
End of story.
Right. Yeah. The clue mindset acts as an investigative journalist. It asks, what specific piece of information is this jealous reaction trying to reveal about my own unmet needs?
Let me try to build out an analogy here. Let's say I'm scrolling and I see a friend from college just opened her own artisanal bakery.
Okay, good example.
The pictures are beautiful, the croissants look perfect, the morning light is hitting the flour on the counter just right. I immediately feel this intense wave of jealousy and inadequacy. The verdict mindset destroys my whole day.
Oh yeah, you're miserable.
But the clue mindset requires me to interrogate that jealousy. I have to ask myself, do I actually want to wake up at 3 a.m. every single day? Do I want to cover my hands in flour, manage inventory, and deal with commercial oven repairs?
You.
Honestly, absolutely not. I would hate the physical reality of baking, so what am I actually jealous of?
That is the exact diagnostic process. What does the bakery represent to your subconscious?
Maybe I'm craving the autonomy she has. I want the feeling of being my own boss, of setting my own hours, or maybe I'm craving a tangible creative outlet because my current corporate job deals entirely in abstract spreadsheets that disappear into the cloud. I want to make something I can hold.
So you have successfully isolated the variable. You aren't jealous of the literal bakery. You are reacting to an underlying value that the bakery represents: autonomy, tangible creation, community connection.
That makes it so much more useful.
When you treat the comparison as a clue, it stops being a weapon you use to punish yourself and transforms into a diagnostic tool. It helps you articulate desires you might have been suppressing.
But I want to push back on this because there is a very tough reality we have to acknowledge. What if a listener feels they are genuinely behind?
That's a fair question.
What if it isn't just a subjective feeling of jealousy, but a stark reality? What if they are 35, bankrupt, single, and living in their childhood bedroom while their peers are building wealth and families?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when we confront the reality of feeling behind, we have to ask the ultimate question. Behind, according to whom? Who drafted this invisible timeline that you are failing to meet?
It's a phantom timeline.
It is a societal construct. For many in the West, that timeline was heavily influenced by the post-war economic boom of the 1950s, a highly anomalous period in history where a single median income could afford a house, a car, and support a family by age 25.
Right, which is just not the case anymore.
Not at all. We absorbed this timeline from our parents, from cultural osmosis, from television. We internalized an economic anomaly as a biological imperative.
However, the constraints of reality are not entirely socially constructed. Age matters for certain biological realities, like having biological children. Money undeniably matters for survival and comfort in a capitalist society.
Absolutely, I'm not denying that.
Right. The window of opportunity for certain highly specific paths, like becoming an Olympic gymnast, is not infinitely open. Time is real, and it is finite.
This is where we must achieve a delicate synthesis, balancing harsh realism with profound self-compassion. You have to be honest with yourself without being cruel.
Honest, but not cruel.
Yes, you can look at your bank account and say, I wish I had started aggressively saving for retirement 10 years ago. I am now in a difficult position. That is honest realism. But you do not have to tack on the cruel, unhelpful addendum. And therefore, my life is ruined, I am stupid, and I am a fundamental failure.
Which perfectly sets up the anatomy of how we look back at our choices. We are talking about the critical internal battle between regret and shame.
They're so different.
Because looking back at those missed opportunities, like not saving money, or staying too long in a bad job, or letting a good relationship die, it triggers incredibly intense emotions. But there is a massive psychological distinction between regret and shame.
This differentiation might be the most psychologically impactful concept we cover today. Regret and shame are often conflated, but they operate entirely differently within the brain. Regret says, I wish I had made a different decision. Shame says, something is fundamentally wrong with me because I made that decision.
Regret is focused on the action. Shame is focused on the identity. Regret is information. Shame is paralysis.
Neurologically speaking, when you experience intense shame, the amygdala fires and essentially hijacks the brain, shutting down the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for logical planning and executive function.
So you literally can't think straight.
You literally can't. If you believe you are inherently stupid or broken because of a past choice, you rob yourself of the cognitive agency to make a better choice now. You are frozen.
But regret?
Regret leaves the prefrontal cortex online. It separates the action from your core identity. It allows you to evaluate the past mistake objectively, extract the lesson, and apply it to future behavior.
This ties deeply into how we view changing our minds. We are culturally conditioned to view changing our minds as a profound weakness.
We really are.
We see it in politics, where leaders are destroyed for flip-flopping. We are told we need to be resolute, pick a path, and stick to our guns no matter what. But changing your mind isn't inconsistency. It is the literal definition of growth.
It is updating your software based on new data. The 20-year-old version of you who decided to go to medical school made the absolute best decision they could, utilizing the limited information, narrow life experience, and incomplete brain development they possessed at that specific moment in time.
They did their best.
Right? 10 years later, the 30-year-old you simply has new information. You now know what chronic sleep deprivation physically feels like. You know the bureaucratic reality of the healthcare system. It is deeply, fundamentally unfair to judge your younger self as if they possessed the knowledge you only gained because of the choices they made.
I want listeners to really hear that. The younger you didn't mess up, they just didn't have the full dossier. You are judging a 2014 decision using 2024 data.
It's an unfair trial.
It is. And this leads to another crucial concept regarding how we evaluate our past, separating the quality of decision from the outcome of that decision.
This is a concept heavily utilized in decision theory and professional poker, often referred to as resulting.
Right.
We have a terrible, logically flawed habit of judging the quality of a decision based purely on its result. If I make a decision and it works out well, I assume I am a genius. If it fails, I assume I am a fool. But life is an inherently chaotic, probabilistic universe.
You can make a brilliant, thoughtful, well-researched decision. You check all the boxes, you consult experts, you do everything perfectly right, and you still get a catastrophic outcome because a global pandemic hits, or a massive company goes bankrupt out of nowhere, or a freak accident occurs.
Exactly.
On the flip side, you can make a completely reckless, impulsive decision, like throwing your entire life savings on a random cryptocurrency because of a meme and get lucky and become a millionaire. The good outcome doesn't mean it was a smart decision.
The outcome is often heavily influenced by factors entirely outside of our control, but the decision-making process is within our control. When we look back at our lives, we suffer from severe hindsight bias, the illusion of inevitability.
Like we should have seen it coming.
Right. We look at a bad outcome, like a failed business, and we tell ourselves, I should have known it was going to fail. But you couldn't know then what you know now. You did not have a crystal ball.
So instead of looking in the rearview mirror and screaming, how could I have been so stupid? We need to shift our posture. We need to move from acting as a harsh judge to acting as a curious student of our own lives.
I love that.
The much kinder, infinitely more useful question is, what can I learn from the person I was then?
That is moving from self-condemnation to self-inquiry. And once you accomplish that shift, once you have gathered the data from your past without shaming yourself for it, you are finally in a psychological position to actually execute a change in your present.
If we realize we are acting out of shame rather than regret, how do we stop the bleeding? How do we actually change our lives without making a reckless emotional mistake? We've done the emotional heavy lifting, right?
We have.
We've dismantled the sunk cost. We've neutralized the toxic comparison. We've forgiven our past selves. So equipped with self-compassion and new information, how do we practically execute a pivot?
We must anchor our reinvention in pragmatism. We have to avoid the romanticized Hollywood version of change. If someone listening right now realizes they need to change careers or leave a relationship, the advice is explicitly not to dramatically quit your job tomorrow, set your ties on fire, and storm out of the building.
Thank goodness, because that dramatic movie scene usually ends with someone crying in their car a week later when the mortgage is due.
Yeah, that part is usually left out.
There's a fantastic guiding principle here in our sources. Get curious before you get dramatic.
Get Curious Before You Get Dramatic is a masterclass in psychological risk management. When we are deeply, chronically unhappy, our instinct is dramatic, sweeping action. We want to flip the table.
This flip it.
We want to march into the boss's office, deliver a soaring monologue, quit, and move to a goat farm in Vermont. But we must be incredibly wary of falling in love with the fantasy of a new life, rather than understanding the granular reality of it.
Let's use the classic example of wanting to become a writer. When you are sitting in a cubicle hating your life, the fantasy of being a writer is intoxicating.
Sounds perfect.
You picture yourself sitting in a cozy, sunlit cafe in Paris, sipping a perfectly crafted latte, wearing a luxurious cashmere sweater, and typing profound, world-changing thoughts while rain gently taps on the window.
That's very cinematic.
But the reality of being a working writer, it's soul-crushing deadlines. It's staring at a blinking cursor on a blank page that is actively mocking you. It is 12 rounds of brutal edits from a publisher, hundreds of rejection emails, and terrible lower back pain from slouching over a keyboard.
You might love the idea of the identity, being able to say, I am a writer at a dinner party, but you might utterly despise the actual day-to-day verb of writing.
Doing of it.
Right. To protect yourself from making a massive, destabilizing mistake based on a fantasy, you have to treat your new plan as an experiment. You must gather empirical data. You must get curious.
You have to test the idea. Don't just quit the corporate law firm on a Tuesday to become a baker. Go take a baking course on a weekend. Offer to work for free at a local bakery on a Saturday morning just to see what 4 Liro AM feels like.
Yes.
Talk to people who actually do the job and ask them what they hate about it. Try it, learn from it, adjust your hypothesis, and try again. It completely removes the paralyzing pressure of having to make a permanent, life-altering choice in the dark.
It recategorizes a life plan from a blood oath to a scientific hypothesis. A scientist doesn't feel shame or an existential crisis when an experiment proves their initial hypothesis wrong. They simply record the data, adjust their variables, and design a new experiment. We should treat our life plans with that exact same objective, unemotional curiosity.
But let me advocate for the listener who is truly at the end of their rope. What if someone is listening to this and they are deeply, profoundly miserable right now? Their mental health is tanking. The thought of just taking a small weekend course or running a little experiment feels like putting a tiny Band-Aid on a gaping bullet wound. Is getting curious really enough when you feel like you are drowning?
That is a very real, very urgent scenario. And there's a brilliant nuance in behavioral psychology for exactly this situation. You must ensure you are properly diagnosing the problem before prescribing a total life reinvention. Very often, what we intensely want in a moment of acute distress is not actually what we need to heal.
Explain the difference there. How do we misdiagnose our own pain?
Well, you might wake up dreading your job every single day. The dread is physical, your stomach hurts, your chest is tight. You logically conclude, I hate this field, I need an entirely new career, I need to go back to school for 4 years and get a new identity.
Right, burn it down.
But the physiological reality might be that you're simply suffering from severe burnout. You don't need a new career. You need a 2-week vacation where you completely disconnect from email and let your nervous system reset.
Wow, okay.
Or consider another misdiagnosis. The career field itself is fine, but your specific manager is toxic and emotionally abusive. You don't need to abandon a 10-year industry. You just need to transfer to a different department or find a new company. Or perhaps you're overwhelmed because you have porous boundaries and never say no to extra projects. You don't need a new life. You need to learn how to tolerate the discomfort of saying no.
Oh, that is incredibly clarifying. We misdiagnose the source of our pain. We feel the intense, localized pain of a bad manager, but we prescribe throwing away our entire 10-year career. It's exactly like dropping a heavy weight on your toe, feeling excruciating pain, and deciding the only logical solution is to amputate the entire leg.
Precisely. Get curious before you get dramatic. In this context means auditing your distress. Isolate the variable that is actually causing the pain. Is it the work itself, the environment, the people, or your own lack of boundaries? Identify the infected toe before you dismantle the entire structure of your life.
I want to transition to a truly fascinating aspect of how we process these changes. We've talked about actions, but we haven't talked about words.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because there is a profound linguistic element to this. The natural, everyday English expressions we use to describe these chaotic life changes aren't just communicating information to others. They are actively constructing our own psychological reality.
We're touching on a soft version of linguistic determinism here. The idea that language and its structures limit and determine human knowledge or thought.
That sounds intense.
It just means language is not merely a passive tool for describing the world. It's the active framework through which we perceive and experience the world. The specific vocabulary we select to narrate our lives directly influences the emotional weight and the physiological stress of our experiences. By utilizing specific cognitive reframing tools, we can alter how our brain processes a failed plan.
Let's walk through some of these specific phrases because they are so practical. The first one is a classic. Things didn't go according to plan. Native speakers use this constantly, and its brilliance lies in its absolute neutrality.
That neutrality is its superpower. If a venture fails and you say, my life just fell apart, or I failed completely, you are injecting catastrophic thinking and profound personal blame into the narrative. You're telling your nervous system that you are in danger.
You're freaking yourself out.
But saying things didn't go according to plan simply acknowledges a divergence between an initial expectation and the current reality. It is an objective, almost scientific observation. It removes the emotional sting of moral failure.
It's exactly like saying it rained on the day of the picnic. It's a bummer. It means we can't eat outside, but it's not a moral failing. You don't hate yourself because it rained.
Exactly.
The next phrase is incredibly versatile. I'm not where I thought I'd be.
It is a statement of fact that leaves the door wide open for multiple, highly nuanced interpretations. It refuses to categorize the unexpected as inherently negative. You could say, I'm not where I thought I'd be, but I'm actually so much happier than I ever predicted.
Oh, I like that.
It allows for the pleasant surprise of an unpredicted superior path. Or it can simply exist as a neutral, grounded state of discovery. I'm not where I thought I'd be, and I'm currently trying to figure out what that means.
Which leads right into the exact highly functional phrase, I'm still trying to figure things out. I firmly believe every single person should have this phrase loaded in the chamber for family gatherings or Thanksgiving dinner when relatives start asking invasive questions about your career or relationship status.
Absolutely. It functions as a critical psychological pressure release valve. Society demands certainty. We are obsessed with it. When an acquaintance asks about your future, there's immense, heavy pressure to invent a coherent, impressive 5-year plan on the spot just to appease them and avoid looking lost.
Saying calmly and confidently, I'm still trying to figure things out, is a radical assertion of your right to be in transition. It normalizes the liminal space between certainty. It tells the other person, and more importantly, it tells yourself that not knowing is a valid, acceptable state of being.
Then there's the comparison between two very similar phrases that carry wildly different emotional baggage. I'm starting over versus I'm starting a new chapter.
Yeah.
We talked earlier about the danger of the geographic cure and running away.
Yeah.
Starting over often implies that everything before this moment was a mistake and it's being deleted. But starting a new chapter honors the past.
Because the metaphor of a book implies structural continuity. If you start a new chapter, the previous chapters do not cease to exist. The plot points, the brutal character development, the hard-won lessons learned in Chapter 3 are entirely necessary for the events of Chapter 4 to make any narrative sense.
Right. Your past experiences, even the painful, messy, or deeply misguided ones, still belong to your story. They aren't erased. They are integrated and contextualized. They are the foundation of who you are right now.
You aren't throwing the book in the fire, you are just turning the page to see what happens next. And the final expression, which really captures the entire thesis of everything we have discussed today, is, I'm learning to let go of what I thought my life was supposed to look like.
That phrase represents the ultimate act of cognitive flexibility and psychological maturity. It is the conscious surrender of the illusion of control. The vast majority of the suffering we experience when our plans fail is not caused by the new reality itself. The suffering is generated almost entirely by our rigid resistance to that reality.
We fight it so hard.
We suffer because we demand that the universe conform to the picture we painted in our heads 10 years ago. Learning to let go of that picture is the only way to actually see, appreciate, and engage with the very real life that is standing right in front of you.
It's grieving the ghost ship, the life you thought you were going to have, so you can finally turn around and actually sail the boat you are currently standing on.
A beautiful, evocative way to summarize it.
Yeah.
You cannot steer a ship while staring at an illusion.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive. We started with the sheer biological shock of shattered plans and explored why our predictive brains panic in the face of uncertainty. We recognize that the 1800s map is not the modern territory.
Right.
We navigated the treacherous, loss-averse traps of sunk costs and the false safety of familiar unhappiness. We dismantled the toxic highlight reel culture of social media and learned how to reframe visceral jealousy as a diagnostic clue rather than a damning verdict.
Lots of untangling.
Yeah, we explored the neuroscience of shame versus the utility of regret, championed small, curious experiments over dramatic, reactive escapes, and finally looked at how simply changing our vocabulary can literally rewire our psychological reality.
If there's one primary synthesizing takeaway from all of this, it remains incredibly clear. If your life is not where you thought it would be, it does not mean you have failed.
Exactly.
It is highly, highly likely that the old plan simply doesn't fit the dimensions of the complex person you have evolved into. And outgrowing a plan is not a tragedy. It is empirical evidence of growth.
To you, listening right now, if you are currently in the messy, uncomfortable middle of a massive change, if the blueprint has gone out the window and you are staring at a terrifyingly blank page, please be patient with yourself. You do not need to see the entire highway. You do not need to invent a brand new 5-year plan today. You only need to figure out the very next step.
And as we close, I want to leave you with one final thought experiment to mull over, building on our discussion of sunk costs, cognitive bias, and new information.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine, if you will, that you were to wake up tomorrow morning with total selective amnesia regarding how much time, money, or emotional effort you have invested in your current path. The memory of the sunk cost is completely surgically erased.
Wow, okay.
However, you retain absolutely all the knowledge of what the day-to-day reality of that path feels like. You remember the stress, the joy, the boredom, the purpose, the toll it takes on your body. Knowing only the reality of the present and completely free from the guilt and weight of the past, would you actively choose this exact path again today?
Wow, let that one simmer. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Take care of yourselves, be kind to your past selves, and we will catch you next time.